Hello, hello. I see there's four people on the screen. I have no idea who you are. If you want to put in the comments to let me know, that would be awesome. Um, Whoever the four of you are, I sure appreciate you being here. This is the first time I've ever done anything like this, and to be quite honest, I'm a little nervous and jittery. I'm used to talking to groups of people. But so here's the deal. Scott Barrows, Super Trooper. That's pretty awesome. Okay, I got to just loosen up. This is sort of weird. I'm not exactly sure what I'm doing here tonight. But I'm going to just start, and maybe other people are going to join, but probably people might be watching this later also. So here's the deal. To, I got to put this in context. If you don't know who I am, I'm a drug and alcohol counselor. I've worked in the addiction treatment business for like over 30 years. And the majority of that time, I have worked. Hi, David. I see you there. That's awesome. I've worked primarily with young people in drug treatment. I ran my own treatment program for a lot of years, and I have always been the guy known as doing a lot of stuff with music and creative arts and theater, and then also wilderness retreats with kids. And I was really into doing spirituality work and like meditation and that kind of stuff. For the first 20 years of my career, that's what I did. And then, like 10 years ago, I wrote a book um, called Appearance Guide to Drug Treatment. I ran my own adolescent drug treatment program for a lot of years, and I became really sort of committed or felt compelled to help families learn how to make treatment work. You know, out there in the world, there can be the reputation, does rehab work? There's so much failed treatment. And running my own treatment program, I learned just how much can be done to help families and avoid a bad treatment experience. And I felt really committed to turning my attention to that. And so literally for the last 10 years, I've sort of been focused on working with families, and I sold my treatment program. I opened a smaller office. But that sort of, I stopped doing a lot of my creative stuff, my music and spiritual stuff. And and I felt very important what I'm doing with the family work, but I've also had this sort of nagging thing that what my real passion is working in the spiritual and using the creative arts and music and stuff to help people in that area. And so that's always been sort of nagging at me. And then even when the pandemic happened, I closed my office, 2 years ago, and that I haven't had any outlet, any venue to do the kind of work that I'm talking about. And and so, like I said, I've had sort of a nagging thing in the back of my mind of feeling bad about not honoring that part of me. And last weekend, I got a wild hair, and just out of the blue, I decided I'm going to put up a Facebook group that I called Jim Savage Recovery that's dedicated for that kind of stuff. Again, I've got family groups and stuff that I have online for that kind of work. But so I created this Facebook group called Jim Savage Recovery, and I'm going to use that as sort of my place to post and do live streams like this. This is my first attempt at trying to do something like this. And so I sort of monkeyed around with that last weekend, and I sent invites to all my friends, and a bunch of you joined, and I really appreciate that. And at one point I looked at the page and I said, I noticed there's a lot of pictures on here that have to do with sunrises. I'm going to pull this up. Take a look at this. This picture here. I took all these images from the Facebook page, and I said, there's a predominant theme here of the sunrise, and I made a comment. I was sort of poking fun, and I said, maybe I ought to come on here and explain what the sunrise means to me, because there's actually very deep meaning for me to all this sunrise stuff. And also in the back of my mind, I knew that I've been, like I said, sort of scared to cross over this threshold into doing live streams like this. And I needed to do something to break the ice and step over the threshold and do this. And so I thought, I need to come on here and I'll do a live stream and I'll just have a little talk about the sunrise and explain to you what this means to me. And that's how I got here doing this tonight. And actually, like I said, it can get pretty deep, but that's my purpose here is the meaning behind this sunrise. As I say, it's going to get into sort of all the principles behind all the work that I've been doing with people in treatment for the past 20 years and the things that are really important to me. Again, you're going to notice this one in the center. Look at, I'm pretending like my cursor. You can't see my cursor. I wish I had a pointer. The symbol in the center, that's my business logo. And the silhouette standing in front of the sunrise. By the end of this talk here tonight, you're gonna understand where I'm coming from with that, because you see some other silhouettes around here right next to it. There's a silhouette with a sunrise. That picture's taken from the stage in my treatment center. Up in the left-hand corner, it looks like a Beatles band playing. Well, I wonder what that's all about. But they're standing in front of that mural of the sunrise. We got a couple pictures have desert stuff. I'm going to explain a little bit where the desert has a little bit of meaning for me. And I'm guessing you probably can, it's not rocket science. There's sort of an inspirational maybe feeling behind some of these things. I'm going to explain this all here tonight. So the way that I'm going to start this is I've got some slides here. I have no idea what my next slide is going to be. But before I switch to it, I'm going to try to think of where I'm going with this. I got to tell you a little bit of my story, because my experience of coming to understand what I'm going to be explaining to you tonight is really important, because it's all part of who I am. Is one of the things you're going to hear me say. My story, I've come to understand, is your story, is your story, is your story, that we all sort of have the same story. That's one of the themes that I like to try to examine. And so my story, as I said, I'm a drug addiction treatment professional, and I've worked in the industry for a long time, but I've actually been around the addiction treatment field for not a lot longer, for longer than I've been a professional in the field. And because I was one of those guys that started early, and my first introduction to the addiction treatment field was when my parents stuck me in rehab when I was 17. And I see that Scott Barrows, who says he's trooper on there, is on here. Scott Barrows, we were hanging out together when I looked exactly like that. That's about age 20, right, Scott? You remember that? And so anyway, my parents stuck me in treatment when I was 17. That was the first time I got introduced to the whole concept of addiction and recovery. I was not ready to hear that message at that time, and I actually got kicked out of that rehab for smuggling drugs into the place. But I did hear that message, and it took me another 5 years to find out that what they were saying in there was true, that addiction is a disease and it doesn't go away and it keeps getting worse. And so 5 years later, at age 22, things got bad enough for me. I checked myself into rehab and I got sober. And I did at that time what a lot of people who get sober do, and they decide they want to go out and help other people. I went back to school and I became a drug counselor. And there I am when I was working as a drug counselor around age 24, 25. And I'm from Minnesota, and this is the early 80s, and that was sort of the mecca of drug treatment. And I got a lot of really good training and good experience. And this picture right there, my first job was at one of the best adolescent drug treatment programs in the country at the time. And that lady there, her name is Vicky Siraki, and she was one of the best mentors I've ever had in the drug counseling business. I imitate her today and say things that she used to say that was, again, really good tools for being a counselor. So I got a lot of good experience. But something else that happened during that time is I made the mistake that a lot of people who get sober and go in to become counselors make, and I didn't work my own recovery program. I was around it all day long, talking it all day, and so I thought I knew more than those people in AA know about it, and I didn't have to do that. And within a couple years, I ended up relapsing again. And I ended up back in treatment at age 28, and this time as a relapsed drug counselor. And that was, as you can imagine, a very difficult period. It was a public scandal when I relapsed. I was the head of a drug counseling agency. I worked in a school district. I was the counselor there to help the kids get off drugs, and I was using myself. And when the news hit that the drug counselor was going to drug rehab, you can imagine the kind of scandal that created. And I hurt a lot of people. I hurt my family, and it was a very, very dark period in my life. I went to they sent me to a treatment program where there was a kid that I had sent to treatment just a couple weeks earlier there. And I was in treatment with him. And it was, when he saw me arrive, he thought I was there to visit him. And he looked down and he saw the wristband on my arm. And he realized I was a patient there. And a grin sort of came over his face. And he proceeded to make my life miserable for the next several weeks. And so that began a very, very challenging, dark period. I put this slide up here. This quote from Joseph Campbell says, "Opportunities to find deeper powers within ourselves come when life seems most challenging." Again, this is going to be a predominant theme as we get into talking about the deeper meaning behind this simple little image of the sunrise, that the sunrise comes after the dark period. And so I went into that dark period. That was a very tough time. And they sent me out to treatment in Arizona. You notice there was a couple desert scenes, in some of my images. That's a predominant theme also. And so I was in treatment out there in Arizona. And when I got there, I'd never been to that part of the country before. I'd never seen the desert before. And an interesting little part of my story is that when I walked up to the treatment center, I looked out into the desert. And in a second, I'm going to actually have a picture of exactly what I saw, because I was looking out in the desert and the mountains beyond, and I sort of heard a voice in my head that said, "You're spiritually bankrupt, and if anything's going to happen for you, it's going to happen out there." Meaning there was something that connected or pulled me towards that desert thing. And I went into the treatment center and I began the humiliating, really difficult experience of being a drug counselor in drug treatment. But while I was there, they had, every treatment center's got them, and I became one of them after the alternative spirituality guy, the counselor who does the meditation, the yoga, the Native American stuff, the beating the drums and things. And they had a guy there, his name was Mike, and he would take us for walks out in the desert. And there was something about that really clicked for me. And I really started getting into our little hikes out in the desert. And Mike talked about he would take people out for these special ceremonies where he'd leave them out he'd take them out overnight and let them sit in this thing of sitting through the darkness and confronting your fears, etc., and sort of the spiritual quest. And I was sort of like, that sounds cool. I'd like to do that. And what ended up happening is when I got done with treatment, instead of going right home, I went out into the desert for 3 days on this sort of spiritual quest. And I'm not going to tell the whole story. That's a whole nother story. It's in the Facebook group. I meant to say, again, the Jim Savage Recovery Facebook. Some of you might be watching this on YouTube. You can go and find Jim Savage Recovery on Facebook and go in that group. And I've got an hour-long recording of what happened to me when I went out in the desert. Because the bottom line is, I almost died. I had couple near-death experiences. I had sort of burning bush, wild, woo-woo kind of spiritual stuff, very weird stuff happen. And again, I'm not going to go into that detail right now, but needless to say, my time out into the desert where I came face to face with death is a really significant part of my experience. And again, you're going to see where we're going with this talk tonight. But the idea was to climb up and sit on top of this mountaintop, basically, and sort of meditate and think about where I was going in my life. And I made it. I made it back in. I went back home and started my own recovery. This picture here is a few years ago. I went back to Tucson and I went to the place, and this was really, I hadn't been there for 30 some years. And this is a picture looking out into where I hiked out into there. And I don't know if you can see this that well. If you look right above my head, halfway between the top of my head and the top of the mountain, there's a lighter spot, that white spot. It's a rock formation, and it's very deceptive because it doesn't look very big from here. But that rock, if you can, hopefully you know what I'm talking about. That was like, the face of that was like 100 feet. It was a cliff. And then up on top of that was like the size of a football field. And that was the goal. I was hiking out to that big rock and I was going to sit up on top of that rock. And so again, I almost died out there. A lot of weird stuff happened. It was rough, but this is a very, very special place to me. My life changed. And that was the beginning. I think this is, of what I've have come to understand about what transformation is really about. And that was a symbolic act of going into that desert and coming face to face with death and coming back out of the desert and starting my life over again. And I began the process, like I say, of my own transformation. Now, I can say that was 34 years ago that happened out there in the desert. And today I'm, coming into the tail end of my career. I've had a long, rewarding career helping people in the addiction treatment business. And I'm a different person than I was back when Super Trooper and I were running around looking like that on the doing the field research part of that. But one of the things that I'll say is that if I take us back to that first couple years in sobriety, I was what you called an impaired professional. I couldn't work in the drug treatment business. I had a lot of time on my hands just to basically sit in my backyard and read a lot of recovery literature. I got really lit up on the spiritual part, and I was reading a lot of spiritual stuff, and I just had to get myself, my feet on the ground recovery-wise before I could start working in the field again. And I started studying a lot of spiritual traditions, and one of the things I had connected with was a Native American spirituality out there in treatment, and I really studied a lot and learned a lot about that. And so one of the first things I'm going to teach you tonight is the concept of the medicine wheel. It's funny, when I was walking with Mike out in the desert, I can remember one day we were out there and he said, everything in life is a circle. And I said, whoa, that sounds deep. That's really esoteric. And well, I wonder if I'll ever be spiritual enough to understand what he means, because I was thinking, he was looking at the cactus around. Everything's a circle. And I thought, man, I have no clue what he means. Today, I do understand what he means. This medicine wheel is one of the best ways of helping you understand what that is. A lot of you are familiar with this symbol of the circle, basically with the four directions. You know, it's what dream catchers look like that we hang from our rear view mirrors, right? But this circle with the four directions has become a very powerful teaching tool for me. I do a lot of work with it. I'm just giving you a quick little overview. Again, this is all just tied to my talk tonight, what's up with the sunrise. This is going to put in context what the sunrise is all about. The medicine wheel is basically the directions indicate the nature of a cycle, and there's four stages of a cycle. There's a beginning, a period of growth, a time of transition, and a death. And the death leads back to the beginning of the next cycle. And so we can see that life, like Mike said, happens in cycles. Everything goes through this same process. We have a daily cycle where the sun rises. We put east as the beginning. The sun rises in the east. It grows as it goes across the sky and reaches its highest point. And then in the west, it sets and begins to move into the darkness. That's the transition. And then the nighttime would be the death time, the end of the day. And it has to die to be reborn when it returns to the east and comes back up again. So again, not rocket science. I think I'm not going to, I give 2-hour talks on just the medicine wheel, but you get the concept of the sunrise, or, the annual cycle. Spring, we plant the seeds in the springtime, they start to grow in the summer, they transition in the fall, we reap, what we sow in the harvest time as things are switching over into the winter time, and the seeds, plants go dormant, it gets dark, just like the night gets dark, the days get dark, and we have the rebirth of the spring. And so we can also look at life on here. Birth in the east, childhood in the summer, that's a time of growth and abundance and a lot of activity. And then over in the west would be when we get to full adulthood and we start to slow down a little bit and we move into elderhood up there in the north. Now, taken it a little bit further, the way that we can use the medicine wheel as a teaching about our personal development. I'm just going to read this real quick because I want to get moving on here. The path itself, the circle itself, represents the path of life, and there's a concept, you're either on the path or you're off the path. And we might say that we start off on the path. We're born, we're innocent, we're spiritually connected, we're pure. But being human means that we're going to make mistakes. Look at, I'm moving my cursor like you guys can see it again. But I'm going down there is to the 2, 3, and there's little arrows. I don't know if they come across on there, but we start getting off the path because we're going to make mistakes. And then as we get a little bit older, into our adolescence, we're time to find ourselves and establish our own identity, and we start to discover behaviors that maybe end up causing us to avoid ourselves, and they might cause problems, and that gets worse, and we get further off the path. And then over there, that number 5 where it says loss of self hitting bottom, then number 6 in the west, and that's with the darkness, where the sun's going down. That might be the hitting bottom time of getting off the path. Things aren't going well, and I have to make a decision. Do I want to keep doing this, or am I going to make a decision to step back onto the wheel and continue this process around? And if I do, I got to go through the north, which is the death time. And that's the letting go of the old self to ultimately bring us around back to the east and start over again, only this time as a new person. And the bottom line is this translates to the movement out of childhood into adulthood, just psychological development. So, but as I started studying this, I started realizing that the addiction recovery process is pretty much the same thing. We have to let go of our old sort of childlike dependent self and it's sort of like growing up and stepping into a new place. Now, another thing that I got into when I was studying all this is the concept of the vision quest. That's a Native American ceremony. And coincidentally, that's when somebody goes out and sits on top of the mountain, cries to the Great Spirit for a vision to show them who they are, what their path is in life. That's what I did going out into the desert without realizing. I didn't know what a vision quest was at the time. But that's, a Native American ceremony, and it can be a rite of passage, which takes young people through that rite of passage of letting go. It's said that a person goes up on top of the hill to die, that it's a new person that comes down. And so as I began studying Native American stuff, I also, I started doing vision quests, and I got trained in leading vision quests. And the bottom line is I ended up for a good 20 years, once a month, for 20 years, I would take a group of young people in drug treatment out on a weekend retreat, and we'd conduct a vision quest ceremony, and I'd stick them all out in the woods and let them have their moment of trying to find themselves, and I would tie that into addiction and recovery and what they were doing in treatment. So the vision quest has been a really important part. This picture here, that's me sitting out in the desert watching the new sunrise come up. And then again, it's been hundreds of kids that I've worked with over the years, helping them have that experience as well. So again, I've developed a lot of curriculum in my treatment programs using the medicine wheel. I call it the recovery wheel here in my curriculum. And then on a totally different another cyclical version of looking at psychological development, I also got into storytelling back then, using fairy tales and mythology as ways of teaching. And this concept of the hero's journey in psychological terms, it's a roadmap for psychological development. The hero's journey, lots of myths, fairy tales follow this common process that you can spend hours and days of long workshops studying fairy tales for all the metaphors of our spiritual psycho-spiritual, I like to call it that, psychological development, spiritual growth. But I'll say this real quick because I do a lot of work with the hero's journey as well. It's another cyclical process. This is 3 stages instead of the 4 of the medicine wheel. But the first stage of the hero's journey is called separation. The hero starts in a kingdom, something happens, and the hero's going to have to leave the kingdom to go on some journey. So they leave or separated from the king. Then the second stage is called the initiation stage, and that's where they face challenges and go through some sort of life and death ordeal. And then the third stage is the return, and that's when if they're successful in their ordeal, they return to the castle and they are reunited with the king, and something usually good happens. They might become king themselves. And so I don't know if you can guess that one or catch on to that's sort of the same process of we leave, the sun leaving, it grows, it goes through this challenge, goes into the darkness, and then we get through that dark night, we're going to come back and the sun's going to come back up and good stuff happens. So that's the hero's journey. So what's that got to do with medicine wheel hero's journey? When I was that impaired professional and couldn't work, I was also a musician, and I thought, well, maybe I can do something with music and recovery. And I was starting to see how this all fit together. Oh, my recovery is sort of the same thing as this medicine wheel, and I was starting to say, this is a bigger picture. Our recovery is like it's like a microcosm of the overall spiritual journey of life, whether you're an addict or not. And I thought, I'm going to write a rock musical that tells this story. And it's gonna be my story, but it's gonna show that it's everybody's story. And so I actually took songs that I had written throughout different times in my life that should reflect that story, and I put them all together, and I called it The Journey. But I related it to the medicine wheel, and that's, you can't read that. It says a musical path around the wheel of life. And so it was like this rock musical. I was a fan of Jesus Christ Superstar and Tommy, and so I was sort of like wanting to do something like that told this story about recovery and show that we all have sort of the same process. And so I put these songs together, and I started going around to treatment centers, and I play them and I tell my story. And then I spent a couple of years working at a treatment center that had a stage that we started working out these songs, and I'd do groups with kids, and what would this song look like if it was acted out? And the bottom line is I ended up putting together a full stage production of this, where I would work with the kids in the band and be sort of like a School of Rock thing. Um, and we had acting scenes, and we would put on these productions. And so one interesting thing that happened was at this treatment center, their stage happened to have this big mural on the back of the stage of a hill with a sunrise on it. And so, and they had theater lights on the stage, and so I got sort of creative, and we ended up creating this effect for the opening scene, where we would make the house dark, and we'd put this little light on the sun, and we'd slowly turn it on, and we'd create this effect of the sunrise coming up. And I wrote some narration this is the opening scene from the play. I'm going to show you this video, and to tell you the truth, this was what I thought I was going to do when I said I'd come on and explain there's a lot of meaning behind the sunrise. I could have just shown you this one video. There's enough to talk about with just that. But I'm gonna put this on here now. And this is the opening scene from this play, and this sort of says it all. This is setting the stage for our life journey.
As I stand in the east, and the first rays of sunlight dance upon the horizon, I feel welcome. I feel connected. I feel like I belong. Yet I know that I will be leaving this place, as it is time for my journey to begin. Just as the sun rises out of the east and makes its way across the sky, I know that I too have a path. I don't know what that path holds for me. There may be dangerous places along the way. There may be painful places. Yet just as the sun must give itself away to the darkness that it may rise again, I know that I too will one day return to this place. This place, which feels like home. This place, which is the beginning of life. This place, where the voices greet me singing, "Welcome, for you deserve to be here."
And so there we have our sunrise again. So this, I'm going to take a second just to talk about some of the narration there. As this I wrote this piece 30 years ago, and I'll tell you, in the last 5 years in the treatment business, and they've started talking about trauma, and it's becoming more recognized. You'll hear people talking about, well, the solution to addiction or the opposite of addiction is connection. The word connection has become a pretty popular word. And I started realizing that little 2.5 minute opening scene of this play pretty much says it all, because here's the meaning, or the what this is portraying about this. As I stand in the east and the first rays of sunlight dance upon the horizon, that very first ray of sunlight, the furthest point east, the beginning of life, the magical place where life comes from. And it says, I feel welcome, I feel connected, I feel like I belong. And I just want you to think about that. That's a good feeling. And again, it's that purity, the innocence of childhood, or even before childhood. And to be honest, I have a workbook that is part of this curriculum for this play. And in this section, there's one part that talks about the concept of what we call original wholeness. The infant in the womb doesn't know what it is to have unmet needs. A baby in the womb doesn't know what it is to be too hot or too cold. It doesn't know what it is to have a wet diaper that they need to cry to let somebody know, hey, you need to change me, or hey, you haven't fed me soon enough. They don't know what it is. They're in a blissful state. Oh, I should put, hold on a second. There, I want to put, because I put my hands, they're in this blissful state of in the mother's womb, and it even gets so deep in the interpretation of this, the sound effects there, the music. 9 months in the mother's womb, soothed by the nurturing sound of the mother's heartbeat, that drum beat, bum, bump, bum, bum. And we can go pretty deep on just talking about the magic of the drum beat, the pulse of life, the pulse that goes throughout the universe. And that's what makes drumming so magical, and why we connect with that. And then you had also the sound of water in there, the rain sticks, and that, you could say, represents that watery world of the womb. And when I think of the infant suspended in the womb in this blissful state. And that's what I think of when I'm hearing this narration. I feel welcome, I feel connected, I feel like I belong. But then it says, I know that my journey is about to begin. I don't get to stay in this place. And that's that separation of the hero's journey. And the blissful state of in the womb, and then all of a sudden, boom, we're delivered, hit the delivery room floor, the bright lights, they whack us in the ass and make us cry, and it's like game on for life, and we begin this human experience. And it says here, just as the sun rises out of the east and makes its way across the sky, I know that I too have a path. I don't know what that path holds for me. There may be dangerous places along the way. There may be painful places. Life is going to be tough. But just as the sun gives itself away to the darkness, that it might rise again, I know that I too will one day return to this place. So this is suggesting that even though I know I don't get to stay in this blissful place, I think that I'm going to be able to get back here sometime. And then it closes by saying, this place which feels like home, this place which is the beginning of life, this place where the voices greet me, singing, welcome, for you deserve to be here. I've work in treatment groups, and we sit and we study these, and I have people underline what lines stand out to you. And one of the most common lines that people underline is that last one, welcome, for you deserve to be here. That resonates with people in terms of, they say, I want to feel that way. I want to feel somewhere like I'm somewhere where I belong or where I'm welcome and that I deserve. It's sort of like an affirmation of validation. And so again, I use this to suggest that what the that separation, that loss at the beginning of life is what we're striving for. Is we want that feeling of connection, and it's sort of a mystical feeling as well, right? And I end up suggesting, I use this to suggest that I think that a lot of what we're looking for, those of us who use mood altering substances, and that might be what it is that we're trying to satisfy. And that's when I say the relationship between addiction and spirituality. I think that that's what addiction is we're trying to reclaim that original feeling. And it's very mystical. I'm talking a lot longer than I was intending, so I'm going to speed this up. And I was just going to say, as that play goes on, we have these narrative spots, throughout. In between the narration, we're seeing how it plays out in a real person's life, the real life scenarios. But then this metaphorical, watching their life parallel with the sun's journey across the sky. So down in the south, when the person's starting to get off the path, there's this group of kids come out and they look like this. They wear these masks and they're dressed in scrubs, and they say, somewhere along the way, I just sort of seemed to go away. I thought I was trying to find myself. Looking back now, I see that's where I began to lose myself. And that's starting to get off the path, but not even being able, not even aware that we're getting off the path. And then the sun comes around to the west and it starts moving into the darkness. And in the play, things are getting bad for the lead character, and she's hitting bottom. And so it's that move into the darkness. And so the section there is called The Dark Night of the Soul. And the narration there says, as I stand in the west and the sun slowly disappears beyond the horizon, I know that this is the time for me to face myself. I know that this is the time of looking within. So that first part of the narration says that move into the darkness on the medicine wheel represents the darkness is having to go within ourselves. It's the move into look within there, and we have to face ourselves. And then it describes what a person might be pondering through this act of introspection. When I was younger, I was dependent on others to meet my needs, and that meant that I didn't have a lot of choices about a lot of things. But today I do have a choice. But along with the gift of choice comes responsibility. And looking back, I can see that I've strayed from my path. That's a person's realizing, I've been messing up. I've been coming up short in life areas. I need to do something to get back on the path. It says, I've become lost to myself. But as darkness falls, I think about the hope that comes with the new sunrise. I know that it's up to me to face this challenge with courage and with honesty. I know now that if I'm willing, I too may return to the sunrise and once again walk in the light. So that's our move into the darkness. And then the final stage is the return, just, nod back to the hero's journey. The hero going back to the kingdom. We get through the dark night and we return to the sunrise. And the final narration there says, I send a voice, I sing a song with new appreciation for life. As I stand in the east, I return to the place where my journey began so long ago. With the light of the new sun, I see the path in front of me with new eyes. This is all about the illumination that comes with the sun. That's what the east is on the medicine wheel. The sun is lighting up and we're able to see in front of us. Where over on the west, the darkness is the introspection looking within. East is about being able to see in front of us. And we're seen with new eyes. It continues, it says, today I see the beauty in keeping things simple and recognizing all the gifts I have available to me. I have a renewed relationship with my fellow man as well as renewed awareness of nature and the glory of all creation. Today I celebrate the miracle of life for even the simplest moments, like chopping wood and carrying water. And the chopping wood, carrying water phrase, that's a nod to the final song um, of the play is called Chop Wood, Carry Water. And that's sort of this celebration of new life, renewal. It's a really almost a cheesy recovery anthem because it's got a lot of our recovery slogans and things in it. But it's a symbolism of having come full circle and having in the AA literature they talk about we have a new attitude and a new outlook on life. Everything has changed. We've had the psychic rearrangement that Carl Jung talked about as what is required for recovering from addiction, that it's got to be a spiritual experience that causes us to have a total rearrangement of how we see things, seeing things with new eyes. And so this last picture here, as I said, for years I would do productions with kids in my treatment program. And so the really neat thing that I always felt really, was important to me or felt gratified by, every one of those kids that you see in these pictures has been through that actual experience, literally to the vision quest. They've been out on the hill crying for a vision, facing their darkness. They've battled their demons. They've been the hero on the journey. And there's nothing more powerful. One of the things that, again, why I'm sort of resurrecting this work in my Jim Savage recovery group is I want to get back to using art and music and the creative arts to carry this message. Because when we start talking about mythologies of the culture is what influences attitudes and behaviors. And when Joseph Campbell said once, he said, when Bill Moyer asked him, so what happens when the people reject the message from the spiritual leaders? Who passes the message on then? And Campbell's answer was real short. He said, the artists. We pass on, we influence the mythology of a culture, the attitudes and belief through the arts. Think about that a little bit. And what I felt very gratified for years doing these play productions is young people acting out literally their own story of going through this transformation. And again, you'll see the sunrise is all about that. My whole purpose of coming on here tonight was to talk about the sunrise. I'm going to wrap this up. I had one other thing I was going to say. I guess, because the slides there, I'll suggest that you go look up Carl Jung and his contribution to discussions about AA, how his contribution to getting AA started. There's a story in the AA Big Book about how he was working with a patient who was hopeless, and he ended up telling him that you need a spiritual experience. And many years later, Carl Jung told Bill Wilson, the founder of AA, he said, I wanted to tell that guy a lot, but I didn't think he was able to understand it. But what I wanted to say, he said, I believe that the alcoholic's craving for alcohol is not unlike man's thirst for union with God. And he said, interestingly enough, the same word in Latin is used for both alcohol and for the highest religious experience. Spiritus means alcohol, on one hand, the most depraved poison. It robs people, but it gets in and it consumes and it takes over. And then spiritum, for the breath of spirit. It literally translates to breath, but that's the word for God, or that image of God. And he said the solution to alcoholism, or really is probably referring to addiction in general, is spiritus contra spiritum, or spirit with a capital S against the ravages of spirit. And that's where you'll hear us talking in recovery circles about the spiritual experience of recovery. But I think that sort of takes it to another level of when I said that I think that there's something about us desiring that connection, spiritual connection, and that's really sort of what's going on with for a lot of people when they get into using drugs. That sure was my experience. Then the last thing I'll say here is this concept of, you'll see here I have this continuum: addiction, process, ritual, spiritual. And the word ritual in between there, I focus on that. That's sort of what all this work that I do with sort of the Native American stuff and the ceremonial stuff, it's all ritual. And the concept of ritual is about the fact that we've got a friend, somebody on here might know, a mutual friend, who talks about if all of a sudden I find myself not next to God all of a sudden, who moved? That's the way that he says it. And that point is that God, or whatever we're going to refer to as if we have a spiritual belief, it's like God's there. We just might not be aware of the presence. And ritual is what opens us up to experience that. God doesn't need us to beat drums and burn sage to hear our prayers, but burning the sage and beating the drums for some of us helps us feel like our prayers are being heard. Again, there's also a line in the AA Big Book. It says, if we're alcoholic, where you need some help, and it says no human power could help us, and then it says God could and would if he were sought. And sometimes we make the point, it doesn't say if he was found, it's the looking. And when we create these rituals, that's what helps open us up to having that experience. And I'll close by saying this picture here is when I closed my treatment center. This is the office that I opened, a smaller version of it. I still had a large group room, and you can see my whole thing throughout my career has been to create spaces that create this vibe, this spiritual vibe and this artistic vibe. And I don't know if anybody's on here watching this. Some of my Dallas friends have probably been in this room once a month. One Friday a month, we would have what we called artist recovery meetings here. And this room would be packed, and we would have a recovery meeting, and somebody would be a speaker. And then after they get done, we would have open mic, and people would get up and play music and share their art, and they'd talk about how it relates to their recovery. So again, it was that expression of our own transformation through the creative arts. And I used to like to watch, this place would be packed on Friday night, and I'd sit there sort of in the corner and by the door, and I'd hear people come in, and people had never been there before. And I'd hear them, I'd watch them walk in, and they'd sort of look in the big room, and they'd see what was going on. And frequently they go, ooh, this looks cool. This looks cool. And people would say, oh, this feels good in here. I like this. And it's not by mistake. I have specifically always been aware of trying to create that vibe. And again, ritual is a word that fits with this. All of this has this sort of spiritual vibe thing, and that word ritual fits in that also. And again, that's where I'm coming from. And I'll wrap this up by saying, that's what really I sort of realized when I got the wild hair and opened that Jim Savage recovery group. And I don't have an office anymore to present this stuff through, but you know what? I'm able to do it through that web page where I'm going to come on here and I'm going to play my flute, and I'm going to do workshops and webinars, and I'm going to do storytelling, and we're going to get some live stream, sort of this artist recovery stuff going through this group page, and that again is sort of my purpose, and it's the next level, recovery 2.0 post-pandemic. We've opened up to hybrid and Zooming and stuff like that, and And so that's what I'm experimenting with here in trying to sort of put out what I'm about. And, you know, if you're watching this, if you're watching this in the future, if you're watching this on YouTube, please go look for the Facebook group, Jim Savage Recovery. Hop in there, become part of the community. I have no idea what it is that I'm trying to accomplish with it, but I just want to, you know, try to promote this kind of work and see if it can add something to what we're all trying to accomplish here. So with that, I'm going to wrap this up. I didn't really plan on talking this long. I see that there's still 4 people here. I really appreciate you guys hanging in there. Like I said, I didn't really mean to talk so long. And I'll wrap this up. If you guys got any comments or questions, do we want to have any kind of communication here? Or if not, I will close this out. But anybody got any comments or questions before I close this out? No? No? Okay. Everybody's had to go back to work. All right, we are at 1 hour. Perfect. Thanks so much for being here, guys. I'll see you later.